Hello, this is Jennifer Kenney-Smith. I'm the area sales manager at GitLab, and I'm super excited to dive into a new podcast on all things digital transformation with my new friend, Stuart Wagner, who is the Chief of Digital Transformation at Air Force and Space Force. Hey there, how are you?
Good. How are you, Jennifer?
I'm super good. I am really excited to pick your brain today and have you share some of the ridiculously cool things that you put together for Air Force in regards to DevSecOps. So, welcome to our call. And let's just dive in. First and foremost, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the journey you've been on that got you to this role today, Chief of Digital Transformation?
Sure. When people ask me that, I like to say I prepared, I studied and prepared like many people at the Department of Defense for the wars we're no longer fighting, largely focused on counterinsurgency, non-state actors. Started by, doing my undergraduate degree, studying things like political science, Arabic, organizational studies, and public policy. Went to a defense contractor that focused actually on intelligence fusion for the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and then ended up joining the Army in officer and going to officer candidate school. Made it pretty far into that process before I broke 3 ribs in training, and ultimately that injury led to a honorable discharge. Unfortunately, I wasn't provided enough time to recover and return to training. So I honorably discharged. Ended up then, needing to actually digitally transform myself. I had the opportunity to return to DC, do the things I'd done previously, but I had left to do something different. And so I just kind of continued on that journey, actually driving from Fort Benning up north, actually drove right past DC en route to New York, where I ended up taking some classes in computer science, leading eventually to a master's in computer science. And ultimately a career at Microsoft where I was focused on telemetry collection and fusion at the operating system level. So you could think of like Windows operating system, HoloLens, Xbox, they all run the Windows kernel, Azure Cloud, and trying to make sense of the health of systems for that, which was there's over 1 billion plus devices in the world that run the Windows kernel today. And so trying to make sense of the health of that system and how Windows patches and updates and things can improve it. Then went to Azure, basically thought I was going to do something totally different, which was customer growth and analytics. And I found I was, as a software developer, doing the same thing, except for a different use case. So instead of focused on health of systems, we were focused on growing revenue, growing a subscription, a cloud subscription revenue model. And basically the way you do that is you collect the information about potential customers or current customers, and you seek to increase revenue from current and potential customers while reducing churn. And so we helped deploy machine learning models and make sense of data from that. Ended up then coming back to the Department of Defense, had an unfilled sense of service where I worked at OSD, starting as a data scientist and ending up running development and engineering for an enterprise data analytics store called Advana in OSD, and also started a natural language processing tool chain called Game Changer, which was funded by the J. Finally, I ended up at the Air Force, basically as some sort of promotion, if you will, running digital transformation for the Department of Air Force. So excited to be here, and that's kind of the story that got me here. And I'd say I couldn't have predicted it when I started that journey. And looking back, only those things connect in retrospect.
So great. What a great career. Thank you for your service too.
Sure.
So let's jump in. Can you share a little bit about Game Changer? You and I spoke a few weeks back, and appreciate what you were able to construct in regards to where there's policies that have maybe changed but maybe weren't documented, where there's lots of data in handbooks, where there's a lot of culture that wants to be proactive but also reactive, and then also stuck in change policy and procedures. How did you change the way you're doing business in the DoD?
Yeah, so there's a couple kind of thoughts there. So the first is, so the story for that starts actually my second week at OSD as a data scientist. there was a use case we were working on, and one of the first projects that was, I think the first project I was going to work on, is I wanted to join two data sets together to start to understand some information that was relevant to a problem that we were tracking. And so I proposed to do that. Normally that's like an inner join in a SQL database. But in this case, I needed to get approval to do that, which I thought was interesting. I was a data scientist. Normal job of a data scientist is to combine data together to learn. So I said, hey, I want to join these two data sets together. We think we're going to learn something related to this use case. And the security officer said, well, that's exactly what we're afraid of, right? That you're going to learn something from the data. And I was really taken aback by that. And I started to even question what my role was at the Department of Defense. If I was hired to be a data scientist, but I couldn't join data together, then what was my job? And so I started to ask questions about that problem. The reason for this was because basically we were operating at an unclassed level on unclassified data, but the security officer believed that combining those data could reveal secrets at a higher classification level. And although I had a security clearance and was, relatively trusted, the concern was basically what I could learn from the data, and it produced risk that was larger than the benefits of basically learning from our data. And I thought that was really weird. I did not agree with that. And I thought that was weird. And it turns out that the policy really drives that. So there's these things called security classification guides. They're supposed to define what the policy is for basically when you combine two pieces of data together, what's supposed to happen. What is unclass plus unclass equals what? Does it equal secret? Does it equal top secret? Does it equal compartmentalized what happens? Turns out these security classification guides written by non-technical people, there are thousands of them at the Department of Defense, each 50 to hundreds of pages in length. Many of them have multiple classifications, meaning like part of it is one classification and part of it is another. You can kind of see where this is going. It's almost impossible to actually read and make sense of these, given that they're at different locations. And then a security officer's job is to know all of this information that's relevant to a determination with data, and then make a determination what to do. And the problem is they largely do not read the classification guides. They don't often have access to the classification guides. Their compute between their ears and their memory between their ears isn't enough to be able to actually be able to make sense of the nuance of the policy. And so they just make a best assessment, which is often a risk-averse assessment. By preventing me from attacking that use case, what I did is I took all of my energy that I was going to focus on that use case, and I instead focused on the problem preventing me from getting after the use case. In short, I focused on the dependency, and the dependency was the classification guides. That evening, I architected a search platform based largely on information about Google search, PageRank, Google's approach to search. And I'd actually in school built a search engine, so I knew a little bit about this. I went to the open source community. I basically said, what are the best libraries for semantic search and natural language processing? We're going to run that on the security classification guides. We're going to run that on our policy. We're going to enable data scientists like myself to understand the policy and make arguments to the security officers that were preventing us from joining data together. And I ended up teaming up with some other folks and who were focused actually on policy analytics in general. And we ended up building a policy analytics search engine leveraging that architecture I built that evening, actually. That became this platform called Game Changer, funded by the Jake. It's now used by thousands of users across the Department of Defense. It's got on the order of 10 use cases that have been adopted with it. We can produce multiple tenants of it for different forms of natural language processing, and we've even open sourced it, so it's available on the internet for anybody to use or to leverage for their own use cases. And the thing that was interesting as we've built that tool and developed that tool is the realization that policy is data, which is not something that's intuitive. And so the ability to actually understand your policy requires you to be able to use common tools that allow you to make sense of data. What you tend to find is that when people are isolated and write documents and texts that are ambiguous, that are written, across time, and with the inability to kind of access all the other simultaneous relevant policy that may exist, you find contradictions, you find gaps, you
Right.
find all sorts of problems in policy that lead to effectively challenges around understanding, writing, and applying those policy. And that was kind of the lesson from Game Changer, and that's the problem that we've been going after since there.
So great feedback and information on digital transformation in regards to that program and project. Let's dive in a little bit deeper. So I think of digital transformation as the overarching umbrella. You have areas like cyber and cloud and mobile, and then DevSecOps. So in the realm of DevSecOps, in your experience, what are you seeing? What are you learning? And what are some of your newest observations?
Sure. So digital transformation to me refers to basically the automatic collection. Like, why do you want to digitally transform? What's the purpose? And so there's two parts to that. There's the word digital and transformation. So the digital to me refers to ones and zeros. It refers to bits today, maybe qubits in the future, and the recording of basically those processes. So if I can record many or all of the bits that are part of a process, I've instrumented that process, and I can gain understanding and visibility, automatic visibility into that process. By doing that, I can then connect that to basically the potential areas of emphasis that I might have on my organization, the ability to focus on those areas, and the ability to ultimately improve decision making and automate part of those business cycles. And so digital transformation to me is the automatic collection of data to improve decision making. And the reason that matters is because when I joined the Air Force, that is what I tried to do. And what we found was that there's actually a lot of challenges to that. Number one, we don't actually have this data collected in one repository or one location. It's siloed across the Air Force and the Department of Defense. Number two, that data is often locked in authority to operate environments. So if I want to build on those capability or do analysis on that capability, I'm kind of stuck in a baby environment, an environment that's been designed in production, that's only authorized for production things. And of course, many of the things I want to do, often are new things, and those new things need to be approved. And to get them approved in production, often you don't know what to ask for until you've actually tried it. And so you have this chicken and egg problem. There are some development environments that exist in production, but those environments are kind of locked down, or they're predetermined what can and can't be done. And that has some unfortunate consequences on innovation. So when I think about the DevSecOps cycle, DevSecOps was supposed to provide a secure way to develop and ultimately bring to production in a cyber secure manner, basically software innovation or software progress and maintenance. And instead, I think we've unfortunately, what's been delivered by DevSecOps has been the ability to develop code without the data. And so my opinion is actually DevSecOps may have unintentionally or intentionally, depending on where they were prioritizing their efforts, forgot about the focus and the ability to deliver on the data. And so in the case of Game Changer, which I talked about before, we had to develop outside of that production environment without all of the production data, because that data was locked, right? And then what we would do is push changes to prod, maybe twice a week or once a week, and we would see the results of that those changes to the code or the new application, and we would watch it with amazement and go, wow, it worked. Or more often than not, no, it didn't work exactly as we expected. And the reason it didn't work as we expected is because we couldn't develop with the data. That's development and prod. And so as I assess kind of the state of the Air Force, I see three problems with the way we leverage data. I assert actually our data story is broken. It's broken for three reasons. The first is that typically in industry, your data story starts with the collection of data, which, as I mentioned, is the instrumentation and the automatic collection of data, right? And today in the Air Force, that's limited. It's siloed. It's often owned by a contractor We don't have data rights frequently. And so you find that like this data either doesn't exist, or if it does exist, it's not easily accessible. It's like the tree that falls in the forest that nobody heard. It might as well not exist, right? It's as if it doesn't exist if the enterprise can't leverage it. The second problem, and opportunity as well, is that in industry, once you have that data, you have a development environment to build with that data quickly. You want to build something quickly because you don't want to invest a lot of time into it without knowing there's going to be a return on investment. So you try to build stuff, right? And you want an environment that's most flexible for building and trialing with your data. But we don't have that because I just mentioned the data is locked in a production environment, not a development environment that's authorized with the data most frequently. The third problem, once you have, assuming you have access to the data, you have access to an environment where you can develop with that data. The third thing you want to do is collaborate with that data. You want to like fuse it with other efforts. You want to evaluate it with other people. You want to look for opportunities to produce emergent capabilities with it. And that's what industry does. That's the third opportunity that industry does. But in government, we silo, hoard, and SAP or compartmentalize our data. SAP refers to special access. And those three words are important. The first, silo, refers to culture. So we culturally don't share. We're not incentivized to share. The hoarding is a power dynamic. Many programs actually, if they have special data, they don't want to share it because it maintains the importance of their program and the dependence we have on that program. They're actually afraid to lose power if they share their data, so they hoard it. And then the third problem is the sapping or compartmentalizing, which is a classification problem. It's institutionalized policy that says you can't share data unless you have a need to know. Therefore, it heavily limits collaboration. But with data, you want to combine those data. You want to produce capabilities based on those data. And so this kind of like trifecta of problems in our data story results in a almost impossible degree of required effort that a software developer must undergo to build stuff with data. Right. And as a consequence, it breaks the model and the ability to build with data. So you don't see many applications in the Air Force, especially those that integrate data from multiple sources. If you look at like JADC2 or ABMS, top priorities in the Air Force and DoD, without being able to join the data together, those silos make JADC2 impossible. And our classification policy, which I just described, makes it actually illegal to join these data and scale it to the enterprise through secret networks, specifically because of the classification problem. So there's a serious impact from this data story that I'm trying to work on with many others. And I think actually this has been appreciated in DoD and military circles today, is the ability to leverage data.
Yeah, I feel like you're doing a lot of truth telling here too. Like you're debunking a lot of the miscommunication or where the deficit is in regards to having access to the data to be productive and proactive and disruptive for all the right reasons, right? So you're especially in Air Force, the mission of the Air Force, and how can you actually execute and do deliverables towards the mission when you are not able to do true test and dev with production data? Because all these red flags, right? So tell me, I know you didn't just kind of create this thought process, you have been able to debunk it and work through it and evolve from it. What does that look like? What did you actually get to do next?
Sure. So I don't have all the answers that I've described as a problem. There's a lot of people when I share this who agree. They may not have stated it this directly. I don't have all of the answers to this problem. But what I would say is that the problem, first of all, exists. The data challenges exist because we've institutionalized policy that we don't entirely have the ability to understand, that's contradictory, and that has gaps. And as a consequence, we put humans in the loop to make determinations on whether or not you can join data. And so like many processes which are inefficient and may not even have an entirely clear rule set, automation solves that problem. It forces one to produce rules to solve that problem and removes basically this human element of does it look like something that's bad, right? It requires definition. Something so easy to understand, code could be used for it. something, and it doesn't necessarily need to be easy. It just needs to have definitive rules that are deterministic, meaning they result in the same result every time. Today, we don't have that. Different humans make different determinations with the decisions around risk and data, and fusing data together. So number one is we need automatic classification. We need deterministic automatic classification at the individual level and the aggregate level in order to build stuff that the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of the Air Force said is necessary for our future fight, which is namely connected weapons systems able to engage in multi-domain warfare. If you can't classify the data quickly, you can't effectively leverage it and build with it. First problem, and first kind of solution. And we have an idea how we would do that. So basically, you need to represent the classification guide policy into, like, for example, one way to do this would be a knowledge graph. And then you represent your weapons system data into a knowledge graph, and you relate the two. And if you can relate the two, and you can logically apply the rules on those data, well, then you have automatic classification, as long as that system is trusted and approved. So that's the first kind of solution to the classification problem. I still haven't solved the siloing and the hoarding. And there are two potential attack vectors for that. The first is our hackathon series, which we've announced. And the idea is, like, how do you get to this kind of nirvana shared environment where you're able to collaborate effectively with data at appropriate classification, need to know actually is effectively utilized, and we understand who might have a need to know. By the way, the owner of the data is the one who determines a need to know, but it's illogical for them to solely be able to know who needs to know about their data. They don't know everybody in the Department of Defense, and therefore there's no way they could feasibly know actually everybody who needs to know about their data. And so assume we're not going to arrive there immediately. So the thought is could we produce an environment that's as close to this as possible for a short duration on specific use cases to demonstrate art if possible, demonstrate how you might build this, and then ultimately scale that. And so that's the BRAVO Hackathon series. And what BRAVO's trying to do is produce this environment with operational data where people can build stuff quickly without being encumbered by cybersecurity obstacles. Not because it's not approved, but because we've designated and clearly defined guardrails around our process such that people are allowed to do the things I'm describing in that environment. So this approved environment, which is a development environment and a research environment, is what we've leveraged something called stitches to do that, is the way in which we're approaching this problem. And so we gather basically human beings, because humans ultimately make determinations and are part of the process. We're breaking through the human being problem of sharing and collaborating. We've got the data and we've got software, and we organize events focused on building stuff with data. So that's the second approach. The third approach is changing the way we incentivize collaboration. So if you look at many tech companies, you may actually be incentivized in this manner at GitLab. Basically, many tech companies use kind of really basic evaluation criteria for the performance of an individual. They evaluate frequently their individual contributions because that's obvious. That's what you would normally do. But they also look at, like, how those contributions are leveraged by others. And then the third commonly is how you leverage others' contributions. Notably, 2 out of 3 of those evaluation criteria are collaboration in nature. They also are scaling. You're either scaling somebody else's work or they're scaling your work. And so if we can change our kind of evaluation criteria, especially for senior leaders in the enlisted and officer ranks, if they're required to, for example, give examples where they collaborated with people outside of their organization, ideally they collaborated with people that are ranked lower than them, right? Because we want to actually allow for collaboration between rank. Then that collaboration, in many cases, data is a big part of that. Like, I need to share information about what I'm doing. I need to share information about what I've collected. And often software is a part of that as well. And so if we can start to collaborate more, I think that these data silos, this hoarding problem, if you're incentivized by that, this starts to fade away. And people instead, they realize if they want to get promoted, I need to work with other people and I'm incentivized to do that. Today, there's no clear incentive for that in the Department of Defense. And I think that's a problem. I think that reinforces these problems I've described.
Okay. Can we go back and dig a little bit more into the hackathon series?
Yeah.
With BRAVO. So this is open beyond the DoD.
Yes.
So you invited industry to come and participate, and with a certain clearance level, because the data is cleared. Where did you pull the data from? Can you share?
So sure. So a couple things. So we held a prior hackathon, and then we have one baking right now. So for the prior hackathon, we partnered, or we worked with industry, contractors, and government employees at the Department of Defense. Those data, the location of those data, I'm not unfortunately at liberty to say because it is classified, but what I can say is that the data basically came from operational use cases and weapon systems within the Air Force. And that's the purpose of this event, is to build capabilities for the primary mission of the Air Force, which is humans operating weapon systems and commanding weapon systems. So we had this event in Nellis. We had on the order of 70 hackers, a large number of participants in our science fair, and we basically said, here's some data from real operations. We're not going to tell you what to build. We're not going to tell you how to form your teams, but in 6 days, the Vice Chief of the Air Force is going to be here, and he's going to be interested in what you did. And so whatever you do, make it worth your time. And people built incredible things that's currently being leveraged by current operations, as well as being developed further by existing organizations within the Air Force. And what there's some great outcomes from that. We learned that when you give people access to the data, access to a software environment where you can build quickly, turns out they build stuff and it could be useful. Yeah. So for our next event, though, to clarify, we're actually scaling larger and going bigger. The way we're doing that is, number one, we're going to 3 classification levels now. So we're at actually unclassified, secret, and then a form of compartmentalized classification, which I can't say anything more about on this line. But basically, we're trying to collaborate across classifications, because our belief is that when we fight to defend our nation and against adversaries, we will need to collaborate based on the location of the data, the availability of classified rooms, and the types of comms that exist. And so we must figure out how to do this effectively within the policies and laws that exist. Make no mistake, if we break these rules, we go to jail. It's not, it's a very serious matter, but that's the risk. But if we also are unable to build or share data effectively, and our adversary is able to build, for example, data-driven kill chains that are more effective than ours, we lose. And that's a risk too.
Yeah.
So our belief is that we need to be able to collaborate across multiple classifications at multiple bases with different data sets and use cases that are related but different. And that's what we're intending to do. And our next hackathon is focused on air combat command use cases, as well as Space Force use cases. And so the air combat command use cases are focused, those are a bit more classified, but they're focused on basically how we defend our nation and engage in one of the primary missions of the Air Force. And then the Space Force use cases are primarily oriented around space launch operations. Many of them focus on like the automatic, all of these focus, the unifying theme here is they're all based on the automatic collection of data and leveraging those data for mission sets that exist within these organizations. And for those who apply and are accepted, they'll get to actually see the list of use cases, drill into data with those use cases based on their classification they're cleared to, et cetera. But one of the coolest things I'd say about our event is that we've opened it up because we have unclassed data. We've opened it up to actually any American citizen to be able to apply.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so we've done that because we can. We cleared this with council. They asked us to point to a rule that said, what allows you to do this? And we said back, show us the law that says we can't. Right.
Awesome.
And they couldn't find it. So any American citizen can participate. They will need to be cleared to the proper level if it's above unclass, and at unclass, we do not need to clear them. You can apply as a member of a company. You can apply as an American citizen. You can apply as an academic. You can apply as a member of federal government. Any American citizen can apply. And we're hoping that we get some good applicants.
So great. How many people are on your team that are kind of helping facilitate this, just for other agencies that might be interested? What does that lift look like?
What is the question exactly?
From your team that's
Yes.
helping to facilitate bringing in the people that are cleared, setting up the space. What does that
Yes.
look like? So if I'm in another agency that's interested in using a series of a hackathon to
I see.
become better, what does that lift look like from the Air Force?
I see. Okay. So what let's talk about what are the things that cost. So the things that cost are, number one, the lifting and shifting of data to the environment, the computers, the actual development environment, the logistics and TDY for the people attending, and the space and the infra around that space. In terms of human capital, you can probably organize an event like this with around 7 people in total working that event, meaning support, administration, base access, etc. And that's approximately what we need at a per location basis. Some of the locations cost a little bit more because security is more serious, which means we need to have people. We need to have more people basically involved in the security aspect of it. But the actual logistics, we're talking about 5 to 7 people can organize an event like this.
Awesome. Excellent. So when is the current hackathon, when is that complete? How long is that open for?
Yeah, so that's running from July 18th to the 22nd at 3 separate locations simultaneously.
Okay, so you are still taking applicants for that.
We are. We're officially closing this Friday, although we may still accept some waitlisted candidates. We may still accept some applications, but you can guarantee that you'll be considered if you apply by this Friday.
Awesome. So exciting. I'm really impressed with what you've put together and the evolution of your journey of just asking questions and seeing that there's areas of improvement. Well done, my friend. I hope that the folks listening are inspired and inquisitive and want to do something similar, so we can perform better, so we can overall be better at contributing to make the government's data better and
Yes.
smarter and help us make better choices and decisions, data-driven decisions.
Yeah, I appreciate
Awesome.
that.
Well, we've spent so much great time together. Is there any last closing thoughts or anything you want to share from your journey that you think would be beneficial or impactful?
Yeah, one thing I would say is for those interested in participating in government, one of the things we're finding is that having a build first mentality has been quite special, I think, in the Department of the Air Force and DoD. And so for those interested in trying to contribute, I think being able to build stuff is really a crucial skill that we need more of. And so if you have that skill, we'd love for you to participate and apply for our hackathon and or to join government, where we definitely have that need.
Awesome. Thank you for all that you do, Stuart. It's so wonderful to get to know you. And I'm really excited to hear the next time we talk to hear about the success of this hackathon. All right, folks, thanks so much for listening. Thank you, ATARC, for helping us get this going and continuing to support digital transformation.